The best way to learn a language? Immersion, living where the language is spoken and using it every day. But if that's not in the cards for you this year, you can still learn a language the second best way, and that's with Babbel. Be a better you in 2024 with Babbel, the science-backed language learning app that actually works. Don't pay hundreds of dollars for private tutors or waste hours on apps that don't really help you speak the language. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons are handcrafted by over 200 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Babbel's designed by real people for real conversations. Babbel's tips and tools are approachable, accessible, rooted in real-life situations, and delivered with conversation-based teaching so you're ready to practice what you've learned in the real world. For instance, I've been using Babbel's convenient courses to help me learn basic conversational skills in German while I'm getting ready for a little trip I'm planning. It's not a language I'd ever studied before, but I find the lessons really easy and kind of like hand-holding me through learning a completely new language to me. And it's reassuring to know that with the help of Babbel, I'll be able to greet people, order food, and ask for directions without having to consult language apps while I'm in Deutschland. I'm still learning. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove Babbel is better. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. Babbel has over 16 million subscriptions sold. Plus, all of Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by their 20-day money-back guarantee. Here's a special limited-time deal for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/vulgar. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/vulgar, spelled BABBEL.com/vulgar. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Hi, this is Rob Benedict.
And I am Richard Spate. We were both on a little show you might know called Supernatural.
It had a pretty good run, 15 seasons, 327 episodes.
And though we have seen, of course, every episode many times, we figured, hey, now that we're wrapped, let's watch it all again.
And we can't do that alone, so we're inviting the cast and crew that made the show along for the ride. We've got writers, producers, composers, directors, and we'll of course have some actors on as well, including some certain guys that played some certain pretty iconic brothers.
It was kind of a little bit of a left field choice in the best way possible.
The note from Kripke was, he's great, we love him, but we're looking for like a really intelligent Duchovny type.
With 15 seasons to explore, it's going to be the road trip of several lifetimes. So please join us and subscribe to Supernatural then and now.
Hello and welcome to Vulgar History, a feminist women's history comedy podcast. I'm your host, Ann Foster, and today it's a first for this podcast, actually. Yeah, I think it is. We're revisiting somebody who we've talked about in an author interview earlier, and I am just so interested in this person, and I think you all are too, that I had to give her a full episode. We're talking about the iconic Anna May Wong, who last year I interviewed an author whose name is Yenta Huang, who wrote a biography of her last year, Daughter of the Dragon, Anna May Wong's Rendezvous with American History. So after I posted that episode last year and I was sharing on Instagram, lots of pictures of Anna May Wong, I was asking American listeners, like, if you get an Anna May Wong quarter, just think of her and maybe send it to me. And someone did. And I have my own Anna May Wong quarter now, which is in a place of honor in my home. But I was just so into Anna May Wong and her whole deal after reading that book and talking with him. And then a new biography of Anna May Wong is coming out, and I'm like, fantastic. Like, there can never be too many biographies of Anna May Wong. Her life is so interesting. And I think different people bring a different sort of lens onto the biography. And so I was so excited to have the author of this new biography, which is called Not Your China Doll: The Wild and Shimmering Life of Anna May Wong. The author is Katie Gee Salisbury, who is such a huge fan of Anna May Wong and has been for such a long time. And actually, when I was learning about Anna May Wong last year for the first time, that's where I encountered her book and also her Instagram account, where she posts pictures of Anna May Wong. Basically, her Instagram is Anna May Wong Book. So anyway, I was just like, I need to talk more about Anna May Wong, and Katie happily agreed to come on this podcast and talk about her with me. And I'm so excited to just really dive into Anna May Wong's whole deal, her whole life, how she was such a groundbreaker in so many different ways. It was such a delight to talk to Katie about her, and I hope you enjoy. And then we're going to also put her on the scandalicious scale. Like Anna May Wong is officially a vulgar history girly. Anyway, we get into it. So enjoy this conversation with Katie Gee Salisbury. So I'm joined today by Katie Gee Salisbury, author of the new book, Not Your China Doll. Actually, can you tell me what the subtitle is of the book?
Yes, it's the Wild and Shimmering Life of Anna May Wong.
That's, first of all, how did you come up with that title? That's a great title.
So I came up with the title while I was still writing the book proposal. So it was before it was even a book. But basically, it's a riff off of I Am Not Your Negro, which is the Raoul Peck documentary of James Baldwin. And it's also something James Baldwin himself had said. And I was looking for something that, kind of reframed the stereotypes and the narrative around Anna May Wong's life. And so I wanted something that had a little bit of a defiant edge to it, that kind of, turned things around. And, Not Your China Doll, it came to me, it stuck. And, I'm not the only one to ever think of this phrase, because actually during the pandemic, it kind of popped up here and there at anti-Asian hate rallies. I'm sorry, stop anti-Asian hate rallies. Yeah. So I would see people with protest signs that said, "I'm not your China doll." And I was like, oh my God, that's exactly what I'm trying to say about Anna May Wong. But I think it's in some sense a universal experience for Asian American women, that they've all been objectified and, been, made to feel like a China doll at times. And so I think that's a really interesting connection to Anna May Wong's story, that, it's in some sense a universal experience for certain women.
And that's where your book really, I think, you say I think it's in the foreword of the book, something like 100 different people would write 100 different biographies of Anna May Wong. And this is the one that you wrote. And part of that, what's special about your book is you talk about your connection with her. Can you talk about that?
Yes. So I'm mixed race. I'm half Chinese. I grew up in Los Angeles. My Chinese American family has been in the US for about 5 generations. And I actually first learned about Anna May Wong when I was doing a college internship at the Chinese American Museum in Los Angeles. And my first day there, the curator was giving me a tour of the museum. There was an exhibition of photographs of Chinatown in Los Angeles throughout the years. And there was this one photograph that just as soon as I saw it impacted me. I was like, well, there's this woman in it. Who's that woman? And, the 1930s, and she looks really glamorous. So I asked the curator, and she said, well, that woman's name is Anna May Wong, and she was a famous movie star. And I just couldn't believe that there was a internationally famous Chinese American movie star in the 1920s and 30s, and no one had ever told me about her. And I went home and I was like, "Hey, Mom, you ever heard of this person?" She's like, "Oh yeah, her name sounds familiar. I don't really know that much about her." And it was kind of the early days of the internet, so of course I went on and was just like trawling through all the images of her, and I was like, "Oh my God, I can't believe this person existed. How come no one knows about her? Like this, like we have to do something about this." And so it kind of put me on a mission. And, 20 years later, it's actually, this year is 20 years from when I did that internship. So 20 years later, I finally have a book about her.
And in those 20 years, okay, so me coming at this as like someone who I'd heard of Anna May Wong, I think, I don't even know how, just vaguely I'd seen pictures. And then I saw a screening of The Thief of Baghdad, which was her first major movie. It was like a silent movie screening, in an old theater, and there's an orchestra performing. I'm like, oh, I'll go to this event.
Oh, amazing.
And she was in this, and I was like, oh my God, that's Anna May Wong. Like seeing her in action, I'm just like, whoa, right. Like her charisma and her star power. So that always sat with me. So I'm really excited. So that just sat with me, and that was, I don't know, 10 years ago. But then as her profile has been sort of increasing, like Gemma Chan dressed as her, I think, to the Met Gala one time. I was like, oh my God, I see what she's doing. And she's on a quarter, like, but in those 20 years from you not hearing of her to now she's like on the American quarter.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's been really incredible, especially the last couple of years, to have been working on a book while all of these amazing things are happening. And now when I tell people about her, not everyone, of course, not everyone has still heard of her, but people will be like, oh, yeah, she sounds familiar. Or I did know that she was on the quarter, or yeah, I saw the Barbie. And so there's definitely a much more of a level of recognition. So we're getting closer to what I think she deserves.
Well, and I think it's so interesting. Like, I don't often talk about 20th century people on the show. I'm often looking at longer ago, but
Mm-hmm.
there's been several people I've talked about on this podcast who they were so famous in their day, and then just like everyone forgot about them. And I'm like, but they were so famous. And she was so famous in her time.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, she had songs written about her. I mean, she was so famous in Europe, and then when she went to China as well, the same thing. I mean, it's incredible the way human memory works, that it can disappear that quickly as soon as the person is gone. And I mean, that just tells you that who's telling stories, who's telling history really matters, right? And if we don't take care of these stories and of these important people in our communities, they really disappear from public memory. And I think that is, I mean, that's the flip side of what she experienced in life. The challenges she had as an Asian American actress are the same challenges she has in death, right? Because if there's no one there to remind people about her legacy, then we forget her.
So that's why I'm so excited. There's books about her, like your wonderful book that's just coming out. I think this episode is coming out like the same week it's being published. And so where I've invited you on the show specifically is just to like, let's just dig into it. Let's talk about her story and how amazing and singular she was. Like we'll go through it, but she had the experience of hers, like part of it is similar to other people who are actors in the silent movie era and then kind of struggling to make it afterwards. But then she had the added addition of like being an Asian American woman. And what does that mean? So it's so interesting. It's such a fascinating story. And we're just going to kind of walk through it. So, first of all, can you explain her family and where she was born and what her childhood was?
So Anna May Wong was born in 1905 in Los Angeles. She was the daughter of, her two Chinese parents, who were both born in California. So her grandparents, who I don't believe she ever met, were the people who immigrated from southern China to the U.S., likely around the gold rush. Her father was born in a mining town in Northern California. So he kind of grew up during like the Wild West days, like when the railroad was being built, when there were a lot of miners who were still, trying to, find the dream of making it rich. So her family is really part of the history of California and of the West. And so by the time she was born in 1905, Los Angeles, was just starting to kind of burgeon as a city. It wasn't quite there yet. It was this, dusty outpost. And I think it was very felicitous that she was born at that time because um, she's kind of in like the downtown Los Angeles area, like right at the center of the city. And that in 1910 is like when the first studios from the East start to come out to Los Angeles and set up shop. So she's a little girl, helping out at her father's laundry. That's kind of a lot of I mean, this still really is true for a lot of immigrant businesses. The family, everyone's involved in it, right? When you come home from school, you're helping out at the business. And that was certainly true for Anna and her sister and her other siblings who came along later. So they would help deliver loads of laundry. And so while she was out and about doing things like that, she started to see people making films in the streets because, you didn't get licenses to film on location, and a lot of the studios thought, well, Chinatown is like free environment, free background. We don't have to put up a set. We just show up, shoot in the dark alleyways, and we get, that atmospheric look. So, as the story goes, as she is told her own memoir in the movie magazines, she became known as the curious Chinese child because she was always hanging out around movie sets, asking people what was going on, studying the stars. And she tells this great story about the first time she sees one of these actresses doing a scene, on the street, and it's Mae Murray, and she's dressed in rags, and she looks, terrible, all raggedy, not what she thinks a movie star should look. And she's like, well, I can't, she didn't understand that she was dressed that way for the film, but that was her first moment of thinking, well, I could do that. I could look better than her. I could be on screen. And so from that very early moment, she's decided, like, I want to do that. And she was in the right place at the right time. So by the time she's in, her early teens, which is, that takes us up to after 1915. 1915 is an important year because you have Birth of a Nation comes out, and for cinematic reasons, I mean, obviously it's kind of this racist spectacle that revives the KKK, but within cinema history, it's this really important moment because it's the first time you really have some like critical recognition that film could be an art, right? It's not just a fad. It's not, I try to compare it sometimes because people don't, it's hard for us to imagine film not being considered an art or something serious. But back then it was this new thing and no one really knew what was going to go on, what was going to happen to it, if it was just going to disappear. I mean, it's kind of like TikTok, right? We see people making TikTok videos and we think it's like really stupid and ridiculous and like this can't last. But then it gets elevated to this high art with all the camera techniques that D.W. Griffith uses. And so by that time, after that film comes out, Anna May Wong is 11, 12, and that's when she's starting to get a little bit more serious about wanting to be in the films. And so she's, still helping out at her father's laundry. By this time, she's had some kind of formative experiences. She tells a story of how her sister and her had originally were going to the California school, local school with other white children, other American children. But one day they get taunted by them. They're chased home and called racial slurs. Their pigtails are pulled. And, they're, of course, by the time they get home, they're hysterical and crying and they don't understand, like, what did we do wrong? Like, and their dad has to explain to them at this young age that, that is kind of part of the experience of being Chinese in America, is that sometimes you will be treated this way, but there's nothing to, you should be proud of your heritage. And then after that, they're switched to the Chinese mission school where they're with other Chinese children, but being taught by these white missionary women. And then after their normal American school, they're supposed to go to Chinese school, which is also kind of funny because, I mean, I didn't grow up going to Chinese school because my family has also been in the US for several generations. So my mom doesn't speak Chinese. And I didn't go to Chinese school, but I grew up in a very Asian community. So all of my classmates went to Chinese school on Saturdays and complained about it endlessly and how they hated it. And so it's really funny to see how like Anna May Wong went through the same thing 100 years ago. And she hated going to Chinese school. She often skipped it to go to the movies. And if her teacher found out, he would, give her a whipping. And then when she got home, her father would give her a whipping. And her father would say, I think it's so funny that he would say, if you're going to skip school, why don't you skip, American school? Because I don't have to pay for that. I pay for the Chinese school. So don't skip that school. But anyway, so that, she was a very strong-willed, stubborn girl, right? She's independent minded. She didn't want to do girly things. She talks about how she liked to play baseball with the boys and marbles, and she didn't want to be in the sewing circle, which disgusted her. She couldn't stand it. So she has a very strong personality from a very young age. And again, going back to, she sees people making movies in the streets and just instantly knows, like, that's for me. That's what I want to do. And so she kind of sets her mind to that. And by 1919, that's kind of the first big film she gets in as an extra is The Red Lantern with Alla Nazimova. She thinks it's going to be her big break. I mean, she's only 14 at the time. She's going to be one of these lantern carriers. And before she goes to the set, she curls her hair and tries to put makeup on. And she arrives and they're like, what did you do to yourself? And they have to kind of redo everything. And anyway, she's in the film. And after it comes out, she's script and saved her lunch money and tips from delivering laundry for a week so she can go to the movies with her friends. And they sit in the balcony at the theater. And, after the film is over, one turns to her like, was that you? Like, which person was you? And she tries to tell them, oh, I think I was the last one carrying the lantern. But she honestly doesn't know. That's her first movie experience, is that she's like, well, I don't really know which person I am in the film, but I'm in it somewhere. But I think that really just lit a fire under her to keep going.
Can I just say, you mentioned sort of the fortuitousness that she happened to be living in a place where movies were just starting to be made at a time when movies were just starting to be made. And also, when I did my last episode about Anna May Wong, I was just looking up every photo. There's that Anna May Wong fans, you know them on Instagram. Yeah.
Yes.
So I was just looking at so many pictures of her, and I'm just like, who has ever been so photogenic? And like, I think I said repeatedly, it's like Anna May Wong invented having your picture taken. But like, she was coming out just when movies were starting. And thank God, because she's so captivating on film. Like, she's so, like, you can't take your eyes off of her, just the dimensions of her face and everything. So it's like they were just, because there's that movie that the next, I don't know if it was the next one, but they wanted to do some testing of lighting techniques. And they're like, we need an Asian person so we can test these like lighting techniques. And she was the person who was hired to be the person in that. And then I don't know, like her career is so connected with the invention of film, not just like as an art, but just like she was made to be captured on film. It's like unreal how suited to that she is just physically.
Right. Yeah. She was a pioneer, right? She was part of the beginning of cinema, and you can see that throughout her entire career, right? Because she jumps from medium to medium to medium. She starts in silence. And so, the next important film in her career, really, she is an extra. She has some bit parts in a number of films. She meets Marshall Nealon, who's a young director who was actually known as like Mary Pickford's favorite director. And they kind of have some relationship. She's underage at that point. So it's hard to, she's always said nice things about him. So I assume that it was an amicable relationship, but, she kind of gets involved with Marshall Nealon, but that helps her in a way, right? Because he's friends with Mary Pickford, and he's friends with all these, all the people, all the big people in Hollywood. So this leads to her getting cast in this film, The Toll of the Sea, in 1922. And it's a really interesting film because unlike most Hollywood productions, this one is actually being funded and made by Technicolor. And Technicolor, their prerogative is, well, we want to showcase our new color film, because they're really trying to, break into, they want people to use their film. And they've developed this whole process. And so they had made a previous film that really went nowhere. And the way that the film had been processed during that time wasn't going to be practical. So this is their second try. And they decide, they hire Frances Marion, highest paid screenwriter in Hollywood at the time. They come up with the idea to do a Madame Butterfly story, which is not original at all, right? Mary Pickford and Norma Talmadge have already starred in Madame Butterfly stories. But the idea is that they would then be able to bring in these beautiful, detailed Chinese costumes. They'd have all this lush color in the environment because of the decorations and the embroidery and all of these things that they could bring in. And part of that is because they want to show off the color and the authenticity and the realism, instead of casting white actors in yellowface, which was, pretty standard, they end up casting Anna May Wong and other Asian actors to be in this film. And so she's playing, a version of Madame Butterfly. It's set in China instead of Japan. And, she has this American lover who basically knocks her up and then leaves and comes back and says, oh, here, meet my American wife. And now she's this kind of shamed woman who has a mixed race child who she gives up and gives back to, her so-called husband. Anna May Wong is 17 years old at this time. This is her first lead role. And people start to realize her talents, her abilities, because she can cry on cue. And in this film, she's crying almost constantly, but it's so moving. And even for a story that is as like stereotypical and overdone, she put her own original spin on it and really gave this kind of virtuoso performance. So when it came out, it impressed people on a level that no one had expected. And the film actually ended up doing really well, despite, it not being a typical Hollywood production. And that's what gets her noticed by Douglas Fairbanks. But, just to go back to The Toll of the Sea for a second, she's in the second Technicolor film ever made and the only one that's ever really watched on a wide scale. So that's a really important moment in cinema history, but also in her career because, Douglas Fairbanks notices her because he was doing research. He wanted to do a color film, but wasn't ready yet. But he, was very impressed by her performance. And then that's how he decides to cast her as the, quote unquote, Mongol slave in Thief of Baghdad.
Well, and that's also, as mentioning how photogenic she is and everything, which is a major part of how she succeeded getting roles and getting attention. But like her talent is that's also so important. And you really describe that so well in your book when you're describing her performances in films. But I just remember like as a child, she was at home and you said she could cry on cue and she was at home practicing these things, like do it in front of the mirror, acting and this is a time, there's not, the actor's studio. There's not like, go and get your MFA in performance. She's just like inventing how to be an actress. And it turns out that her instincts of how to do that were correct. And she had this talent for this skill that was just a new skill that was needed. Movie acting. Like, it's just so, again, it's just like the right place, the right time. It's so incredible that, she got noticed but I don't know. It's like 100 years earlier, that skill wouldn't have been useful.
Very, very true. And she might not have known that acting was a career, right? Unless she had been taken to the theater. Whereas, in 1910s Los Angeles, she can just step out her door and see people making films in the streets. So it's very felicitous. A lot of the actors of that time were coming from, Mary Pickford became the breadwinner in her family. Her father had abandoned the family. She started acting in the theater, but then realized she could make more money in films. So a lot of people in Hollywood at that time were coming from working class backgrounds. They were all making it up as they were going.
Exactly. It's like, it's such a new thing. And you talk a bit about like her backstory, like it was never really hidden. Like she's the child of a family that owned a laundry, but other people's background was hidden because they wanted to make movie stars seem glamorous. Like Nepo baby was not a thing. Like everyone is just kind of like a grifter mixed with sort of like everyone just has a random background. Like everyone in Hollywood, like it's this scrappy place, which is like, again, like I have to wrap my head around, like now it's seen as this like expensive, wealthy, sort of fancy place. But then it was just kind of everyone inventing it as they go. And she was right there with them, like just figuring it out.
Right. Absolutely. And learning how to tell the story about who she was. And that, of course, it did set her apart to be Chinese because she could play up certain aspects of that part of her identity. It made her more memorable as a type. But of course there is the flip side to being a type, right? You get pigeonholed in it. So she, she's in The Toll of the Sea. She gets cast in The Thief of Baghdad. As you mentioned, when you saw the film, that's the incredible thing. You can watch people who don't even watch old films or silent films. When they see her movies, they're so moved by her performances. Her talent is just so visible on screen. And especially I think in her silent films, because she, because that's how she started. She, you had to be a little bit more exaggerated in your performances, right? Because everything is visual. There's no sound. There's very few cue cards about what's going on. So Thief of Baghdad, she gets this role, which would seem like a very minor role, but she's basically kind of like the evil, the double agent who's supposed to be serving the princess, but is really working for the Mongol prince who wants to marry her and take over her kingdom. So she's like feeding him information, and there's this famous scene where Douglas Fairbanks is playing the thief, right? He's just kind of this vagabond character who is sneaking into the palace just to steal and rob them of some of their riches and make a profit off of it. But then he falls in love with the princess when he sees her sleeping, and Anna May Wong is there because she's like her lady in waiting, and so he basically holds her at knife point, to stop from being caught by the palace guards. And so it's a very kind of slapstick comical scene where, he puts the knife to her back, and then, he puts her into a corner and then puts these pillows to, prop up the knife so that she's stuck there and she doesn't realize that he's left. And then by the time she realizes that he's like running out the door and climbing down the palace walls. But it was I think it was just, it was comic relief, but it was also her performance, her facial expressions are just so great in that scene. Her surprise at like realizing he's gone. It just left such an impression on everyone who saw that film. And that film, I mean, because of who Douglas Fairbanks was, I mean, he was the king of Hollywood. He was married to Mary Pickford. His films were these huge blockbusters that were, distributed internationally. And then he would go on these big tours. And he and Mary Pickford would be like mobbed wherever they went. So, you knew when you were in one of his films that like millions and millions of people around the world were going to see it. And that's what happened. I mean, she had, starting from that moment in 1924, when that film comes out, she started to have films everywhere. People knew her name. They wanted to see her in more things. And so that film really launched her Hollywood career. And we start to see her in all these different films in the 20s. The only issue is that she's still being cast as side character supporting roles. And sometimes she's, being billed with the other main actors, but you only see her for a couple of scenes. And so they're trying to capitalize on her, her new star power, on her name, but they're not really, the studios and the directors and the producers were not really willing to give her the airtime that was commensurate with like the desire to see her. So it becomes, so the latter part of the 1920s becomes a very frustrating experience for Anna May, because she's had this she's had this early, seemingly easy success, right? She just skyrockets to the top. People clearly can see that she's talented. But now she's feeling like she's being hampered by studios. She's working a lot, but she's getting these roles where she barely gets to do anything. And then oftentimes she's killed off. Sometimes in the beginning of the film, she's just, you see her for a couple scenes and then she's dead.
Can you talk about part of the reason why? I mean, there's various reasons why, but a big reason why she's not able to get a lead film is because she can't do a love scene with a white person.
Right. And so I kind of dispute. So Hollywood would say, yeah, we can't put you in a leading romantic role because you'll be opposite a white man, and we can't show miscegenation on screen, which is, at this time, this is pre-code. So there are no rules. So they could actually do whatever they want, right? And they have plenty of examples. I mean, if you go back to 1915, The Cheat with Setsu Hayakawa, that is, I mean, it's, there are issues with that film because it's kind of like a rape fantasy, right? Like this handsome Asian man, but then he's domineering and is, trying to rape this white woman. And but women went crazy over Setsu Hayakawa. I mean, that film made him the first Hollywood heartthrob, and it's basically a miscegenation, if you want to use that word, an interracial love affair or whatever. Maybe not love affair, but interaction. So there was plenty of things like that were suggestive of those types of relationships. I mean, you have Valentino. I mean, Valentino's, Italian. So he's not technically he's European, but he was still seen as Italians were still considered Latin lovers. So that, and then he was playing the Sheik. So there's a lot of suggestion around interracial fantasies as this forbidden fruit. So it's definitely something that was explored in Hollywood film. So this idea that Anna May Wong couldn't play that type of role because of her race, I think is really an excuse, because she did it in The Toll of the Sea, right? She had already done it and there was no problem then. So honestly, it was something that they came up with because they just didn't want to give her the roles. And I really think this has to do with whoever was at the top, like producers who are making the calls, because there were a lot of directors she worked with who loved her, who knew she was talented, and they wanted to give her better roles, but they were powerless to do so in the system, that in the studio system at that time. But yes, that's what she's told, is like, look, we're just not going to put you in these leading roles because you're Chinese and you can't be opposite a white actor. So by, 1927, 1928, she's also become this kind of, her social life has blossomed, right? Because she's this more intelligent, interesting personality, She's hanging out with a lot of international people who are working in Hollywood. So she's hanging out with the Germans, Emil Jannings. She's hanging out with some British people who are there. And she's kind of progressed in her love affairs. So she met Charles Rocher, who's British by birth, but had been in Hollywood for quite a while. He's a cinematographer. He's also a very exciting personality. He had, filmed, he had filmed the Mexican Revolution with Pancho Villa. He was like in the midst of like the war and he gets captured and almost dies. And so he has these exciting stories, and he's just returned from spending a year in Germany where he was studying kind of the Weimar filming techniques. So she meets him and they start an affair, and he's also probably bringing her into some of these more sophisticated circles. And so she meets all of these interesting people. And one of them, Karl Vollmuller, is this playwright, socialite guy who comes back and forth between Germany and Hollywood. And he basically writes a story for her. And that turns into a deal with UFA, which is like the premier film studio in Germany. And they're like, well, why don't you come to Germany and make a film for us? And so by 1928, she's completely ready to do that because she's fed up with the way she's being treated in Hollywood. And she's like, well, I had this offer to star in a film. They've written it specifically for me. And, why shouldn't I do that? And, some people tell her like, you shouldn't go. It's like such a huge risk. If you go, you'll come back and no one will know who you are. But, given the circumstances, she's like, well, I'm ready to go. And so she's only 23 at that point, but she decides to do the film, and her older sister, Lulu, goes with her. And so they set off. They travel to New York first, and then they set sail for Germany. Of course, she didn't speak a word of German.
I was going to say, I was just to note, like she did not speak German. Yeah, yeah.
And the farthest she had ever been up to that point was Canada. So, that's a huge, can you imagine like at 23 and like you also have to you're sailing there. So it's going to take you about a week to even arrive. So like the anticipation of arriving someplace. And so she and her sister Lulu they arrive in Hamburg, and they have to get on a train to Berlin, and they have to figure out how to find their train. And so they're just like listening, waiting till they hear some people say Berlin, and they just, follow them in that direction and they get on their train. But, it ends up being, the experience of a lifetime. Everyone is very excited to work with her because at that time, European cinema was starting to, they had this strategy where they were working together. Like, so there was a British International Pictures and UFA were working together. The idea was to create films that would not only be distributed throughout Europe, but also could be distributed back to the US. They wanted to compete with Hollywood, essentially. So they thought, well, maybe we should start importing some Hollywood stars, and let's see if that works. So Anna May Wong was a part of that strategy.
I want to also mention, and this was, I think, from pretty early on in her career, she was a movie star. People liked seeing her in films. Obviously, like some of the critics were like, it's too bad there's not more Anna May Wong in this film because like people wanted to see her. But she's also a celebrity in the sense of like, here she is modeling the latest flapper fashions. Like she became known as sort of this fashion star as well, like a celebrity in that way as well. Can you talk a bit about that aspect of her?
Yes. From the earliest days of her fame, she was modeling furs, modeling different dresses. Sometimes she would model with cars as well. There's a couple photos of her doing that. But she also had sometimes looks that were created for her that were combining both the flapper styles of the day, but having a little bit of an Asian flair to them. And that was something that she ended up maintaining her wardrobe style throughout her career, was to always have some element of Chinese design, whether it was embroidery or flowers or the colors. And then she even started to have her clothing embroidered with her Chinese name, which was a really lovely touch. And so she'd have it on a dress or her handbag or her hat. And so it was a very distinctive thing that she did. But she also just had like an impeccable sense of style. It's hard to, you kind of either have that or you don't. Yeah. And she definitely had it. And then add to that the fact that she looked amazing in almost everything she put on.
I'm thinking, I'm like, yeah, it's like Zendaya or something. It's just like, put her in anything. And it's like, that's amazing. Put those clothes on anyone else. You're like, you look like a circus clown. Like she had, just so people understand, if you look at pictures of Anna May Wong, like she looks amazing constantly.
Yes. And the way she naturally poses herself. I mean, she's so good with her arms and her hands. I mean, that really is a feature of her, of the portraits of her. Like a lot of times there's something with her hands or her arms. And if anyone else tried to do those poses, we would look, absolutely ridiculous. But she always looks amazing. I mean, when I went to college, there was this joke about one girl who had a photo of herself with her arm over her head where you could see her armpit. And I mean, Anna May Wong, how many photos of her are like that? There's so many where her arms are raised but you never complain about it. She looks amazing.
But that's the thing, again, when I was looking at pictures of her last year, and I kept saying facetiously, but also honestly, I'm just like, Anna May Wong invented having your picture taken. Because it was a new thing also, like glamour photos. Like she couldn't look at Vogue magazine and copy the poses she's seeing. Like how is she thinking of these things? Like she just inherently knows, like her and like her working relationships with photographers. She looks great. But I also want to mention too, like we're still in the 20s. We're about to get into the 30s. But while we're in the 20s, I thought this was such a funny story. And it was in your book that that she was an American raised person. Like she's from California. Like that's how she speaks. And she was in silent films and people are like, oh, she's this like, exotic person. And then there's a thing where she comes in, it's like an interview with someone else. Was that Thief of Baghdad? I forget. Anyway. And she just blows in and she's wearing this amazing outfit. And she's like, well, hey there, isn't the Charleston just the bee's knees? And they're all like, oh my God, she's a flapper. And she's such a flapper. She like is the flapper. And people just did not expect that of her. Like, so that's because there's the Chinese, the way that she looks and the way that she's treated as an Asian person, that's different, but she's so American and that startles people, I think.
Exactly. People can't get over it. There's this great line from one of the reporters. She becomes friendly with Myrtle Gephardt, where she has this long, flowery description of like how her skin's like porcelain and this and that, and she's like a Yuan Chen poem that like stepped out of the page, and she's like, and then she opened her mouth and ruined it all because she realizes she's just like her. She's another flapper. She's a young woman. She's up on all the slang and all the cool things. And I think that that's something that Anna May Wong really leaned into during that period of her life, probably because people thought she was foreign, thought she was so Chinese, she was subverting their expectations, right? By being even more extra, like flapper. Like, I'm going to show them, like, I can outdo them. I'm more fluent in this culture than they are. And of course that changed later in time as she realized that the flapper persona was a little bit of an act and that it wasn't truly who she was. So she starts to go back to her roots and relax and be a little bit more of herself at a certain point.
But this is something else where I'm just thinking, like, you see that today, again, like I keep thinking of movie stars today, but somebody who has a persona and they're like, well, this is how I'm going to stand out. And this is and their PR team is like, yeah, really lean into the fact that you're whatever. Like PR wasn't invented. She's just figuring, and well, I guess it was for like Mary Pickford, but she's just inventing this herself, and her instincts are all exactly what people now try to do. Like she just had the savvy, and she could look around and see how am I going to make myself stand out? Like, oh, like the contrast of how I look or how people see me and perceive me with my behavior, that gets more attention. People find that interesting. Like her instincts were just like so spot on and so contemporary and so modern, and that just blows me away. And now we're just going to take a break for a word from our sponsors.
As a podcast network, our first priority has always been audio and the stories we're able to share with you. But at Realm, we also sell some pretty cool merch, and organizing that was made both possible and easy with Shopify. When you think about successful businesses like Aloe or Allbirds or Skims, an often overlooked secret is the business behind the business that makes selling and, for shoppers, buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. That's because nobody does selling better than Shopify. It's the home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not-so-secret secret that's definitely worth talking about is that Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%. That's more happy customers and way more sales going. If you're hoping to grow your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout we use with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/realm, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/realm to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/realm.
Hello, my name is Alison Larkin, and I'm a writer, comedian, and narrator and host of the Jane Austen podcast. This podcast brings Jane Austen's stories to the 21st century, along with commentary from me and conversations with fascinating people who all share a love of Jane Austen. And of course, we had to start with none other than Pride and Prejudice. So join me as we embark on a journey through some of the most wonderful stories I know. The Jane Austen podcast with Alison Larkin is available wherever you listen to podcasts.
People often look at me with confusion when I ask them what their only one in the room story is. They think it has to be like mine, where I went to a 600-person event and discovered that I was the only Black person there. I know. Horrifying, right? Hi, I'm Laura Cathcart-Robbins, and I am the host and creator of the podcast Only One in the Room. Every week, my co-host Scott Slaughter and I invite you to join us for an hour and lose yourself in someone's only one story. This podcast is for anyone who has ever felt alone in a room full of people, which is to say that this podcast is for everyone.
I'm Brennan Storr.
I'm Paul Bestall.
We're the Ghost Story Guys.
And every 2 weeks, we explore first-person stories of encounters with the paranormal from all around the world.
Then we have some fun reacting to those stories. We like to say our goal is to scare the hell out of you, then make you laugh.
Belief in the paranormal is not required. All you need is a love of great storytelling and curiosity about the world around you.
Come find the Ghost Story Guys on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else fine podcasts live, or at ghoststoryguys.com.
And we're back.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And it's funny too, because sometimes we forget just how modern she was, because during that time, I mean, it was a new thing to be like an independent working woman.
Yes. And that's such a strong through line in her story, and also the way you tell it in your book, is that in the one sense, like, yeah, to be an independent woman was like not the norm in like American culture, but then also in Chinese culture, like her father were just like, why aren't you getting married? Like, what is your life? Like, what are you? Her mother was just like worried that like her soul was being stolen by having her picture taken and stuff. Like what she was doing to me. Thank you for reminding me. It's just like, I'm like, yeah, she's a movie star. It's glamorous. She's great. But it's like, no, this was weird and new. And her family was like, what are you doing? Like, this is not the way that anyone lives. Like it feels so contemporary, so it doesn't feel weird to me, but to so many people around her, it was just like, what? Like,
yeah. And I think it's for a lot of Asian Americans, I think it's still a very common theme, is this idea of, I mean, it's like the filial piety. You're supposed to do what your parents want you to do, right? Because like you feel like you owe them for whatever they've sacrificed to raise you, to give you a better life. And there's always these expectations from Asian parents that you're going to, you know, do the traditional thing, have a good paying job, or get married and have children and have raise a family. And so she's not doing any, I mean, she is bringing home a lot of money. So her dad's like, okay, well, that part is good. We like the money, but this is, I don't really want this for you long-term. I don't see you, doing this. You should get married and have a family. So, I mean, I think for a lot of people, there's still a lot of those expectations. I mean, granted, they're a little different, but going into a creative field, for example, is not something your Asian parent usually wants to hear about.
So she goes to Europe, she has success in Germany, she learns German, and she's able to get these like starring roles, right? So talk a bit about Piccadilly, for instance.
So she's made 2 films in Germany, and then she goes to London the summer of, I believe it's 1928. And so she's, again, another film that's been written specifically for her. I mean, granted, these films still play into certain stereotypes, But she's allowed, I mean, she's the star of these films, and she's given so much time on screen, and there's a lot of complexity in the way that she plays these characters. So Piccadilly is about a Chinese woman who's working in the kitchen, washing dishes at a nightclub in Piccadilly Circus, and she gets discovered. She's dancing in the scullery, in the room where they wash the dishes, and everyone's like wrapped with her beauty and her grace. And so she gets discovered and becomes one of the dancers at the nightclub, and very quickly supplants the other dancer, Mabel, who's played by Gilda Gray, who Gilda Gray was, famous for the shimmy. She invented the shimmy. She was famously got paid a lot of money to make films in Hollywood, and then was brought over to the UK to be in this film. And so technically, Gilda Gray was billed as the star of this film, but all the critics knew that it was Anna May Wong. And they said, whoever let Gilda Gray do this film was not thinking, because she doesn't look great. But she played the part very well, because it was kind of, the film almost was like art imitating life, right? Because in a way, Anna May Wong became this incredibly famous person because of the film. And so she plays Shosho, who gets this dance scene. It's a very strange dance. It's hardly a dance, but it's so mesmerizing in the film, but also to the people who watch the film, right? I mean, she's meant to mesmerize the people in the story of the film, but then everyone who watches the film is also mesmerized by her. And so she just it blows up in London after this. People have, she's in the magazines almost every week. She's modeling Chinese shawls, and everyone wants something with embroidery or a Chinese flair. And she's constantly mobbed by the paparazzi. So it really made her a huge star in England. And people back home are starting to hear about her success in Europe, right? And thinking, oh, well, they're starting to see her in a new light. And there's this one letter she gets, or she has her response to an offer to do a film in Hollywood. She writes a letter in response, and she has it published in the papers back home. I mean, this is how, going back to her savviness, right? She knew how to use the media to her advantage. And so she has this letter printed that says, oh, thank you so much for this offer, but I don't think I'll be home by Christmas. I'm busy here. I just made this film and it had a great reception. And now I'm going to be starring in this play on the West End, and et cetera, et cetera. So her career really blossoms. And as I just mentioned, it leads her to do her first play, her first live theater experience on the West End.
And that's, again, where her voice takes people by surprise.
Yes. I mean, so up to that time, no one has heard her voice, right? Because these are all silent films. So she's playing a part in what was, I think, like a 12th century play from China that's been adapted. Well, it was first translated from Chinese into German, and then from German into English. And so they're doing this production. It's called The Circle of Chalk. And all the other actors, there's one other Chinese actor, Rose Kwong, who plays a role in it. But besides the two of them, everyone else is white in yellowface, which is just, the way that things were at that time. People didn't blink an eye at that. So they're in this play, and all the critics are basically shocked to hear her voice. Apparently, she doesn't sound Chinese to them. I don't know what Chinese was supposed to sound like to them, but she sounds like an American, and she has this twang, and she's very slangy sounding, and they can't stand it. It's just like, who is this person? They can't get over the way she sounds. And so all of the reviews are criticizing her accent, which, I mean, she deals with it very, I think, diplomatically. She gets a speaking coach so that she can have a more British accent. She goes to this luncheon and, tries to massage the situation. And then she says something, and as a kind of tongue-in-cheek joke, she says, now I will say something in a language none of you can understand, and says something in Cantonese. So it was a disappointment in that, like, the play closed very early. People did not like it. I mean, there were various reasons why there were problems with it, but it was hard, I think, for her to be the star and then to be criticized for being supposedly not Chinese enough.
And that's such a tension that she faces throughout her career, which is like, she looks a certain way and she sounds a certain way, and then she acts a certain way. And like, people are expecting these things of her where she's just like, this is me. Like, she's like American of Chinese descent. And everyone's just like, but no, you can't be both. Like, that doesn't, like, I guess, like, we're moving into the era of like talking films. And she does make that shift, which not every silent actor did. A lot of people's careers just ended when talking films came in. Like, people couldn't adapt, like, because the acting style became a bit less broad. Like, you had to change your style, and some people just couldn't do that. Some people's voices were just too squeaky or whatever. But she, perhaps because of this experience in England, and she had the voice coach, so when talking films were starting, she's like, oh, her voice actually, she's worked on this already. Like, she's ready to start talking.
Right. So she basically trained herself in kind of that transatlantic accent that you always hear in the movies. And it's always made me curious what she sounded like before then, because we don't have recordings of that. And she just kept the accent. She always spoke that way after that. But yeah, she makes the transition. She actually makes her first talking film in Europe. It's her last film that's through the partnership with BIP and UFA. She makes a film 3 times because back then they didn't have dubbing, they didn't have subtitles. So she makes the film in English, then in German, then in French. So which is kind of incredible.
So it would be
right?
like,
Who does that?
You act out the scene, then like, okay, cut, now do it again in German. Okay, cut, now do it again in French, like that sort of thing?
Well, not even that, because they had different actors in the productions. So she made it first in England, and then I think the other films she went to France and Germany to make them.
She literally did the movie 3 times. Oh, wow.
She literally did it 3 times. And the German critics said that her German was too good. It was almost like an uncanny valley experience where they're like, this doesn't make sense. So, you just can't win. I mean, that's what it feels like for her. But anyway, so she makes her first talking film. Then she says she's ready to go back to the US. She comes back to the US. She was on her way back to LA, but she arrives she has to sail from London to New York. In New York, they're doing a version of this Edgar Wallace play that had already opened in London, called On the Spot. It's this play that is supposed to be set in like kind of gangland Chicago. And the gang leader has a Chinese mistress, and the producer catches her as she's leaving the boat and says, will you do it? Will you be in the play? And she agrees. So she ends up staying in New York and opening on Broadway like 2 weeks later from when she arrived. It becomes a huge hit. It's a big success. So she is in New York for almost 6 months. And then she travels the play before she finally returns to Los Angeles in 1931. By that time, Paramount has signed her to a 2 film contract. And the first film is Daughter of the Dragon, which is a Fu Manchu story. She's playing the daughter of Fu Manchu, but they're basically trying to give her her big starring role, her big moment. Of course, they're doing it a little bit differently than Europe had done it, right? It's within this, Fu Manchu universe. Well, you have to play the evil character. You have to be in this very stereotypical story. I mean, they spent a lot of money on it, right? They give her these, like Travis Banton, like designs these incredible costumes for her. I mean, there's so many costume changes in that film. That's one of the one great things about that film is that she just looks incredible in every scene. And then, they get Sesu Hayakawa to come over to play the detective, the good guy, whereas Warner Olan is playing Fu Manchu in Yellowface, and he's playing Anna May Wong's father. So, all of the effort and the resources are there, but the story itself is just so, I don't know, so schlocky and pulpy and stereotypical and completely unrealistic. The script, the lines that she has to say are pretty ridiculous. Like she's like basically lusting after the blood of this British family that she's going to kill. So, it doesn't actually do that well at the box office, which I think from the perspective of the producers is like, oh, like she just doesn't do well here. Like she doesn't sell, right? She's not box office, but really I think it was the treatment it was the film. It was like the story. It was everything that they did. It was just wrong. It was wrong for, people. It just wasn't good in my opinion. So she does that film. She continues to do on the spot. By that time it's come. She does a production of it in Los Angeles and in San Francisco, and then she's offered a role with Marlene Dietrich in Shanghai Express. And this is a really interesting moment in her career as well, because she's previously met Marlene when she was in Europe. They met at the Ryman Art School Ball in 1930 at this kind of raucous, carnival type party. And they have this famous photo of them there. It's her, Marlene, and Leni Riefenstahl, who then, later goes on to be Hitler's director. But at the time that photo was taken, Anna May Wong was the most famous person among them, right? Leni and Marlene were famous in Berlin, but they weren't known in the US. And it was Joseph von Sternberg who does a film with Marlene Dietrich, technically the first sound film made in Germany, The Blue Angel. And from that film, which no one has seen in the US, he basically gets Paramount to give Marlene a deal and bring her to Hollywood. And then so by the time that they've met again in Hollywood now to do this film, Shanghai Express, they've kind of reversed roles. Now Marlene is this huge star. She's been made by Paramount. She's the big catch, and Anna May Wong is going to play a supporting role to her.
And they have a gigantic pay disparity, but I think Anna May Wong often did, between her and the white actors in her films.
Yes. I mean, huge pay disparity. I mean, Marlene was getting paid so much money. She got paid more than Joseph von Sternberg to do that film. So it was this crazy thing. But yes, I mean, Anna May Wong was getting paid way less. I mean, but that was true also of Daughter of the Dragon, which was her starring vehicle. And she made less than Setsu Hayakawa and Warner Oland, way less. So that, unfortunately, pay disparity followed her throughout her entire career. But yeah, with Shanghai Express, she's suddenly the supporting role. But it's a great film. I mean, my only complaint about that film is that there's just not enough Anna May Wong in it, but she's incredible in it. And you can really see how she excelled under Joseph von Sternberg's direction. He got the performance that he needed from her. Sometimes you need that, right? You need to be challenged and also nurtured by someone who sees your talent and understands how to utilize it. And so a lot of people think that Marlene and Anna May Wong had an affair, a romantic affair. It's been rumored. I mean, Marlene, of course, was bisexual. She had relationships with men and women. That's pretty well documented. But I personally, I was curious about this. If it was true, I definitely wanted to find some evidence of it. And from everything that I've seen, there's nothing there. I mean, they weren't even very close friends. There's no mention of them ever hanging out with each other in any other setting. I mean, which Anna May Wong was very social. So people who were friends with her, you knew about it because they were at her Chinese New Year dinner. They were out and about at lunch in Hollywood, things like that. And there's no mention of them ever being together outside of work. And then I was able to get in touch with Marlene's daughter, who is still alive. And she was on set at Shanghai Express as a 7-year-old. And she also wrote, a kind of tell-all biography of her mother. So she was very aware of everything that was going on in her life. And so I asked her, do you think they had an affair? Because that's something that people talk about a lot. And she said, absolutely not. They were friends, but they were not lovers. And so what I tried to do in the book is kind of reframe that narrative as well, because I think they were much more friendly rivals in a way, because they were both seen as these exotic femme fatales, right? They were kind of competing for the same roles. But, Anna May Wong didn't have a director like Joseph von Sternberg in her corner. And then there's this one anecdote that comes from another biography that when Marlene was screening an early version of Shanghai Express, she invited a friend to come with her into the screening room. And he made the mistake of saying, wow, that Chinese actress, she's really wonderful. And after he said that, then the screening room went silent. It was very chilly. So I think that there was definitely a sense of competition between the two.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad that who knows the personal lives of various people, but I think,
right.
Yeah, that's sort of the lore of Anna May Wong. And I mean, yeah, you did all the research you could to try and figure out what was going on. And we'll never truly know. But like, it seems like she was professional when she was on set.
Yeah.
So you go into detail in your book about everything, but basically Hollywood not being great to her, part 3. And she decides to go to China.
Yes. Yeah. So she's had a number of years of being in and out of Hollywood, right? Because she's just, again, the same treatment over and over again. And she doesn't get cast in The Good Earth. Instead of sticking around while that's going on, she says, well, you know what? If Americans want to see China, then I'll show them real China. I'm going to China and I'm going to take the cameras with me and I'm going to write about it and I'm going to have an incredible time. And that will be, my own counter narrative to this whole idea that the good earth is what China is, right? So she set sail for China in 1936, her first time going back to China, her only visit, and she's there for 10 months. And it becomes this life-changing experience for her. I mean, one, she doesn't expect that anyone's going to know who she is there, which is not the case at all. When she arrives in Shanghai, she's completely mobbed by people. And then she also has some contentious experiences as well. When she tries to go to Hong Kong, there's a misunderstanding and it ends in this kind of crowd that's there to see her becoming an angry mob and shouting like down with Wang Liu-song, her Chinese name, like, this ungrateful person, she comes here and snubs us. So there's some contentious experiences there. She also has this, banquet with the nationalist government in Nanjing, and they kind of spend like an hour criticizing her about the roles that she's taken and why have you portrayed China in this light. And she's like, well, I don't know if you know how Hollywood works, but I didn't really get to choose my roles. But she takes all of this in stride, right? Like, I think to her credit, she really listens to the things that people say, and she starts to have a deeper understanding of how important her role is as an actress, that it's not just her career, she's representing people, whether she likes it or not. I mean, it's an impossible position to be in, right? How could she represent, Asian Americans, China, and centuries, thousands of years of history? Like, how could she be the only one to represent China? But that's basically what people are telling her. Like, if you portray us negatively, then everyone thinks that all Asian women are like that. So she takes this to heart. She has this, 10-month experience in China. By the time she comes back to the US, she's ready to criticize Hollywood very publicly. And she does so. And she says, Hollywood doesn't want to cast Chinese actors to play Chinese roles. They will cast anyone else other than Chinese actors. And I think the thing that's really compelling about this is not only does she say it publicly, but it doesn't result in her being blacklisted. Like, you would think that Hollywood would say, well, we just forget her. Like, we're not dealing with this person. They just complain and accuse us of all these things. Instead, what she's able to do is she brokers a new deal for herself with Paramount in the late 1930s. She says, she was friends with Warner Oland, who by that time was playing Charlie Chan very successfully for Fox and making them a lot of money. She says, well, why don't you put me in a detective type series? Like, I could be the female version of Charlie Chan, and that way I get to be the heroine. I'm the good guy. I solve these cases. And so that's basically what happens at Paramount. I mean, they don't call her, like the girl Charlie Chan, but she ends up getting a series of roles where she's playing a heroine and she's kind of solving these thrillers and getting to be the good guy in the end. And because they're, these films are B movies, so they're not getting the same level of resources some of the other films she's done have. But because of that, she has more flexibility. She has more influence and control over the scripts, over the stories. And so the first film she makes when she comes back is Daughter of Shanghai in 1937. She gets her childhood friend Philip Ahn cast as the male lead. And together they, make history. They become the first Asian American actors to play a leading romantic couple in the sound era. And what's even better is at the end of the film, she gets her happy ending. They end up, the happy couple, it ends up together in a car and they're going to get married.
She doesn't die for once.
She doesn't die. And also all the bad guys are white people. So she really flips the script. And the thing is, I don't think anyone really noticed what she was doing. Like, it was groundbreaking. I mean, she made history. But I think that's such a significant part of her story, is that she took this bad situation where she's not cast in the first sympathetic film to be made about Chinese. And instead she goes to China, does a lot of soul searching, comes back and is very like clear about her vision for what she wants the rest of her career to be.
And I think this is like, I'm really happy to talk about this part of her. Obviously, I have to talk about all of this because I love Anna May Wong. But like this part of her career, I think as much as she is known today, it's like 1920s, flapper person, silent movies. Like her story kind of ends with Shanghai Express, but she did so much important work later on. It's just they were in B movies. Like the movies maybe aren't as well known anymore. But when she came back from China, like I don't know, like this is just an era of her life that I feel like is like when she's on The Quarter, it's like young, glamorous 1920s Anna May Wong. Like her Barbie is like 1920s Anna May Wong. And that was maybe the height of her celebrity, but like she didn't go away. Like she...
Yeah, I mean, she had incredible staying power, right? I mean, of course, things got harder as she aged. I mean, well, first of all, so she makes this series of films with Paramount at the end of 1930s. And then it's the war years. So that was a hard time for everyone, right? She has family who has to flee back to the US from China. She basically puts all of her efforts towards fundraising for China. I mean, she does like so much work during the war years. I mean, she became like an air raid warden in Santa Monica. Like she was doing so many different things. And she does make 2 films that are, I mean, basically propaganda films to support China. And she gives all the proceeds to those films back to China Aid. So by the end of the war, at that point, 1945, she's 40 and she's been drinking and smoking for the last, 20, however many years. So she's aging. And that makes it very difficult for her to be able to get the types of roles she had previously, right? And everyone in Hollywood who had been a star earlier on is kind of going through those experiences, right? They're aging, their celebrity has faded, and they're trying to figure out how to recast themselves, right? And so by the 1950s, when television comes along, she again makes history by becoming the first Asian American to lead a television series. So she's basically again generated this idea of being, now she's playing. So it's called the Gallery of Madame Liu Song, which is her Chinese name. She's playing a woman who runs an art gallery or an international art gallery, and she's basically going around the world solving art crimes. So she's spinning off of her detective idea again. And it's like a 13 episode series that she does with Dumont.
Have you been able to see
on primetime television?
Does that exist? Can people watch that? Have you been able to see any of it?
Unfortunately, no. I mean, we don't know if there's other copies of it's out there, and lots of us are hoping that one day it turns up. But basically what happened was Dumont went out of business and they went bankrupt and had some kind of legal issues, and whoever, had their whole, catalog of shows decided to dump it into the East River in New York. So that's the story, is that all of those shows were lost and, somewhere in the bottom of the East River. That said, I mean, a lot of us are thinking like, I mean, how could it be that there's only one copy, right? There's got to be something else. So it might turn up. I mean, lots of things are always coming out. I think recently part of The Crimson City, which was considered a lost film, has turned up. So, I mean, there's hope. I mean, I would love to see it. I mean,
it just sounds so good. Like
very few photos.
Anna May Wong traveling the world solving art crimes. Like,
I know, right. Right. So she does that in the 50s. But, at that time, her health is in decline she's suffering from cirrhosis of the liver. Because she's not working, she's a bit down on herself. She's probably drinking a lot. So it was a difficult time, but at a certain point, she starts to snap out of it and gets, is going out for more opportunities in television. She does a lot of character parts in different TV shows. And then by 1960, she's kind of rediscovered by a young producer, Ross Hunter at Universal, whose specialty is actually reviving the careers of like early Hollywood stars. And so he casts her in Portrait in Black. I mean, she's playing a maid, which is not an ideal role. And it is a little bit hard to see her play such a subservient kind of insignificant character. But I think she does it. She definitely puts her own spin on it. And I think there's power in her performance in that film. And then Ross Hunter acquires the rights to Flower Drum Song. And he wants to make history by having the first all Asian cast, principal cast. And he casts her in one of the important roles of one of the elders. And so that is basically where her career is right when she passes. She's like several weeks away from beginning rehearsals for Flower Drum Song. And, it's sad in that, yes, it's a missed opportunity. But I think from her perspective, if you put things into her perspective, she was right where she wanted to be. Her career was on an upswing. She was making this comeback, which was like, a really incredible thing to see. I mean, she was 56. No one expected her to be around and making movies anymore. I mean, most of her peers were not, right? They were not making films at that time. So, and she was going to make history by being in this all Asian cast. And I mean, because she passed, the cast, I mean, they basically had the actress who played that role on Broadway come in, and she was mixed race. She wasn't Asian, but they slotted her into that role. And so unfortunately that cast was not, I mean, that was the one person, the one character that was not played by an Asian actor. So then they kind of lost that status otherwise it would have been, I mean, it was still a groundbreaking film, but would have set a record had Anna May Wong been able to be in it.
Can we just talk about as well, like she passed, like, I don't know. It's like you said, her career was on an upswing. Like she was about to do this big project. Like things are going pretty good. But her gravestone, I think, is interesting because some old Hollywood stars have like these have their English language names on their graves and it's not shared with somebody else. And she has a different situation.
Right. So she's buried at Angelus Rosedale, or Rosedale Angelus. If I got that, I might have switched the name. It's actually one of the oldest cemeteries in Los Angeles and the first to be integrated, meaning anyone could be buried there, regardless of race or religion, which is not the case with a lot of cemeteries. People don't realize that cemeteries were also segregated. You're segregated in life and you're segregated in death. And so she was actually buried with her mother and her sister Mary, who had previously passed. And so her name's actually not on the gravestone. And it's their Chinese names, I believe. And so you wouldn't know that she was, I mean, people do know now that she's buried there, but it's a kind of a private, I think that the family probably wanted some privacy for her. And, for the book, I got to know Anna Wong, who is the niece of Anna May Wong. So her father, Richard Wong, was Anna May Wong's youngest brother, and they became very close. And they lived together probably for 20 plus years at the end of her life. And he, in a way, put his own life on hold for her because he didn't want to get married or leave her, abandon her. So he didn't get married until after she passed. But from the stories I've heard from Anna Wong, the niece, they always had people coming to their home with stories about they just either wanting to talk to him or claiming they were related to the family, or just, people, fans, but also people who were really obsessed with Anna May Wong. And so I think they really just wanted privacy for her to not have to experience that. But even though they were also experiencing that.
So I guess that's like, yeah, the gravestone is like to her as a person. Her family was always important to her. People who want to pay tribute to her as the movie star, like she's on the Walk of Fame. Is she? I think, yeah, exactly. So that's where I feel like that's where a fan can go to like take your selfie and like pay respect.
Yeah. I mean, you can go to the cemetery as well. It's open to the public, but it's a little bit harder to navigate. And you have to kind of ask them where the grave is and that type of thing. So it's certainly not it's not Hollywood Forever Cemetery, right? It's not in this very glitzy, well-trafficked place.
Was she, in terms of the Walk of Fame, the first Asian woman?
I believe so. It was her and Sasu Hayakawa. So the Walk of Fame began in 1960. So they kind of installed the first class of people were all installed at the same time. So it wasn't exactly the way it is now, where when there's a new star, they get a whole ceremony, because it was like a whole bunch of stars all at once. But yeah, she was the first along with Setsu Hayakawa.
And she was also there because the Walk of Fame is by Grauman's Chinese Theater. And she was there at the opening of Grauman's Chinese Theater.
Yes. So she had 2 moments where she was involved with the opening of Grauman. So she, when they began construction, she was like at the steel plant and like drilled in the first rivet. Because of course, Sid Grauman, he was a showman. So he knew what would make headlines in the newspaper. So he, of course, wanted to have a Chinese star come and do that. So she did that when they began construction. And then when they broke ground on the theater, Anna May Wong was also there with Charlie Chaplin and Norma Talmadge.
It was a funny coincidence. I was reading that part of your book just like, I think the same day that it was in the news that James Hong, the Asian male actor who was born in the 1920s, he was getting his hands and feet ceremony at that theater. And I'm like, oh my God, and Anna May Wong was there. And he was just being born around that same time. So just like the legacy. And he was in Flower Drum Song. It was just interesting to see the continuation, and also just like how not long ago all of this was, Anna May Wong's whole life.
Right. I mean, it's long and it's not long. It's like this weird thing because it feels like it's taken so long for Asian Americans to become visible in Hollywood and in mainstream media. When you think about the fact that Anna May Wong had been doing this 100 years ago, you're like, well, why did it take this long? We were already here. We were here. And then we went away for whatever reason. And I mean, it was really powerful last year to see Everything Everywhere All at Once win all of these awards and be at all these ceremonies. And I think it was the SAG Awards, James Hong gave a speech there. And it just always stuck with me. He told the story of how like his first film was with, oh gosh, I'm going to forget, was with Clark Gable. And he was in a film with Clark Gable, which is like, that's old Hollywood, basically. I mean, not the earliest Hollywood, but pretty, classic Hollywood. And he said, yeah, producers used to say, we're not box office. Asians are not box office. And he's like, well, look at us now. And I think it's just so incredible to be able to see someone who's seen that within their lifetime and been able to be a part of that transformation.
Exactly. And then you mentioned this quote in your book as well, but also I just was thinking of it now too. Like Michelle Yeoh in Everything Everywhere All at Once, she said when she read the script, like it brought her to tears because she's like, finally somebody, like a project where I can display all the things I can do. Yeah. And she's been so successful and she's been in so many things, Michelle Yeoh, but it took her to that point to actually be given a role that
worthy of her talents.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, hearing her say those words, it gave me chills because it was like, I feel like that's what Anna May Wong would say. Finally somebody understood that I could do all of these things. That I'm also human.
So at the end of these episodes, I have this scale and I gave you a heads up, we're going to be doing this. So to add Anna May Wong officially to my pantheon of scandalous women who I've talked about on this podcast. So there's 4 categories. I think we're going to have a really good discussion about significance, but the first category is scandaliciousness. How scandalous was she seen by, and this is like, because she was an international figure. So if we think, and she lived for quite a while, like, so in the different parts of her life, like how to her father, I think she was very scandalous. But then also it's like, I think all actors were to a certain extent, but I don't know. So how, on a scale of 0 to 10, how scandalous would you score her?
Yeah. I mean, so that's something I think that changed throughout her lifetime. I think like if you were to score her when she first started in Hollywood, I think she'd be more scandalous. If she was younger, she had a lot of affairs with people, especially from her parents' perspective, it was scandalous. Like, what are you doing? This is crazy. But then I think later, she mellowed out and became I think she had a very decorous reputation. I mean, she kept a lot of her personal life under wraps. So scandaliciousness, I would probably say like maybe like a 6 or a 7.
I'm going to say 6.5. But yeah, because if you add, I don't know. And a lot of it was her own actions were like scandalous to people who were just like an independent woman living on her own. But some of it was sort of like, she didn't make the choice to wear like the bikini that she's in The Thief of Baghdad.
Right.
Like that wasn't her, she wasn't running around like that.
Yeah.
That's just what she's given to wear.
Yeah.
The next category is scheminess, and that entails just a person with a plan who's able to who's able to pivot with what life throws at them and to come up with a plan and to be successful. And in that context, I think she was very successful.
Yes. I mean, she was constantly pivoting. And I mean, not all of the ideas she had came to fruition. There wasn't, I mean, some things just didn't work out or there wasn't enough follow through. But I think in terms of her, scheminess, like her resilience, her just ability to always come up with new ideas for herself, I would give her a 9.
I think for sure, like, and from her childhood, she was just like, I'm going to skip Chinese school. I'm going to learn how movies work. I'm going to make myself so present that they have no choice but to put me in a movie. Like that, I think that's, she was always very, ambitious, but also just proactive, I guess is the word.
Proactive. Like, I mean, she just was so clear-minded. Like she knew what she wanted and just went for it.
With such a confidence. And again, like I kept bringing up, but like in a really contemporary way, like her instincts about how to be a movie star when the concept of a movie star was brand new, we're just like we still see people doing that today. But yeah.
Right. And she didn't have like a stage mother or a big studio behind her. Like she didn't have anyone who was grooming her. I mean, she did all of this herself.
Definitely high scores there. Okay, significance. I mean, I feel like this is a 10, but like let's talk through it.
Yeah. No, I mean, if I think it's also an automatic 10. I mean, she's the first American-born Asian actor. I mean, the number of firsts in her career. I mean, she really was also the first woman of color to play a leading role in Hollywood. She became the first, first Asian American to lead a TV series. But even before that, her and Philip Ahn made history with Daughter of Shanghai. She was in all of these different mediums. I mean, if there's one person that Asian American actors look up to today, it's always Anna May Wong. I mean, she was there first. So I think it has to be a 10.
I think definitely. And also just as significant, she was so famous in her time. She's on a quarter, like that doesn't happen to just anybody. You have to be very significant. And then the fourth category is, so we call it the sexism bonus, which is basically how much did sexism get in her way? And I don't know with her because so much of what she faced was the racism.
Right. I mean, I think the sexism she experienced was through the lens of her race, right? Because it's, you're the China doll. You're the China doll or you're the dragon lady. And so it wasn't ever, I mean, those types, there's the femme fatale, but then she had to play a racialized version of that, an exoticized, an even further exoticized version of that. So it's hard to separate the two because her gender was always connected to her race. And then when she aged and wasn't young and beautiful, she couldn't play those roles anymore, right? So then she has to play the maid. She has to play the hired help. So it's a little tricky there. I would say, and I think also because she was so modern and independent minded, she did break a lot of those barriers as well, right? Like she never married. And I think it's important to put that into perspective as well, because I think some people want to say that, how sad she never married because she couldn't marry anyone because she was Chinese. And I mean, of course that's part of the story, but it really isn't, because there's plenty of people who went around anti-miscegenation laws. If they were truly in love and wanted to get married, she could have. And of course she had many offers of marriage in her lifetime and she declined them. And she had lots of affairs. So I think she was very happy to be single. And we oftentimes people think of single women as spinsters, whereas like a bachelor is like seen to have like more agency over his life, which is just also, again, like a sexist assumption. But I think that she lived her life the way she wanted to. So on that scale, I would say, I don't know, maybe a 7.
That makes sense. And like you said, it's so tied up, like, and even the fact that the roles that she was so often given to play, and with her dying, which is
yes.
Where it's just
she died 1,000 deaths.
And she said that, right? Or
Yes. She said that's what they should put on my tombstone when I die. She died 1,000 deaths.
That's why it's just exciting for me that she, in this TV series that hopefully maybe one day we can watch, she was just like hanging out solving art crimes. Like, good.
I know. It sounds so fabulous.
That just seems more like her in her life, like more representative of what she is. So she ends up with a 32.5, which on the scale, anything above 30 is like A+ score for somebody.
Amazing.
I'm just thinking here. I don't know, because I've done so few like 20th century people. I'm trying to find anyone in that area who is like, for instance, like Cleopatra has 34.5.
Oh,
so
wow.
Anna May Wong, 32.5. So she is up there.
She's up there.
No, Nefertiti, 31.5. She's like between these like Egyptian
I love that.
She's right in the middle. No, it's perfect. So thank you so much for joining me today. I couldn't think of anyone better to talk to about Anna May Wong. Like, clearly this is such a passion of yours. Can you tell people also you have your newsletter?
Yes, I write a newsletter called Half Caste Woman that is about Anna May Wong and about the book, as well as Asian American representation in general. So sometimes I do some deep dives into what's going on today with films and how that kind of relates back to Anna May Wong's career. So yeah, you can find me there. And I also, will post updates about the book tour. I'm doing a bunch of events in New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco to start. And yeah, I'd love to connect with more fans of Anna May Wong. And yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
What's the main hub where people can see like your list of events and things like that, like a website or your Instagram?
Yeah, I mean, you can go to notyourchinadoll.com, which will have updates on all the events. And then I'm also on Instagram at Anna May Wong Book, where we post more photos of Anna May Wong, as well as updates about the book.
You can never get too many photos between you and the Anna May Wong fans on Instagram. I'm just like, ooh, a new picture. I haven't seen that one before because they're all so good.
No, it's super exciting. I mean, I still come across new photos of her all the time. And so it's really incredible like how many images are there of this woman, like thousands. It's just like an endless treasure trove.
And again, like I'm grateful that she existed in the era of photography so that we can see all these pictures because her personality shines through so strongly in all of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you again for taking the time to talk to me today and to share your love of Anna May Wong.
Thank you.
So I do want to just emphasize again, the book is called Not Your China Doll, The Wild and Shimmering Life of Anna May Wong by Katie Gee Salisbury. And you can get all the links and all the info, including links to her newsletter and her Instagram at notyourchinadoll.com. And that's got all this stuff about all the events Katie has coming up in various cities. And I think I'm just so excited for a reason for us all to think about Anna May Wong and reconsider her story and just celebrate her all together. And yeah, so this is Vulgar History. Speaking of books. So this month is Women's History Month. March is Women's History Month, a thing that I sometimes forget because in this podcast, it's Women's History Month every month. But this is specifically Women's History Month. So it's a nice time for us to be maybe people who don't often think about women in history to be thinking about it. And one of the ways that we're celebrating Women's History Month on this podcast is with the Vulgar History Book Club. So all this month, we're talking about a book called The Tower by Flora Carr, who was on the podcast last week, interviewing her, talking about it. And so to take part in this book club, so The Tower by Flora Carr is a book. It's a historical fiction novel about Mary, Queen of Scots and her time in Lochleven Castle, which is the place where she was kept prisoner for, I think, 11 months until she escaped in this iconic heist with the help of Mary Seton and young Willie. It's a novel all about that stuff. And I think it's so vulgar history coded, and I'm excited to talk to all of you about it. And by talk to you, I mean by posting questions and having discussion on Instagram. So every Wednesday, aka the day you're listening to this, probably, I'm posting a new discussion question on Instagram about The Tower by Flora Carr. And every Saturday, I'm posting, which is the day that Patreons are listening to this, I'm posting a discussion question on Patreon as well. And it's different questions in both places. So to take part in the book club is entirely free. You can go to the Patreon vulgarhistory.com/AnnFosterWriter. Actually, just go to vulgarhistory.com/book club, and the link is there. The link is also in the show notes. You just have to join with a free membership on Patreon to join those discussions. And then on Instagram, like obviously just go on Instagram, Vulgar History Pod, and the discussion questions will be there. And we're just talking about The Tower by Flora Carr all month. And I'm excited to get into all of it with you because this book, like, it was a book that when I think I said this in the episode last week, but when I first opened it, there's a cast of characters and I had to like close the book because I was so overwhelmed to see all the names of all the people. Like young Willie is on there and I was just like, I can't handle it. And then you start reading the book and I'm just like, oh my God, it's Lindsay. Like everybody's there and it's just lots to discuss. So that's the thing that we're doing. And also, speaking of the Patreon, so doing the book club stuff on Patreon is free. Like there's a way that you can just join it for a free membership on Patreon. But if you want to be a paid member of the Patreon, same place, patreon.com/AnnFosterWriter. So for $1 a month, you get early ad-free access to all episodes of Vulgar History. If you pay $5 or more a month, all these prices are Canadian, by the way, so convert that into your local currency. For $5 or more a month, you get the early ad-free access to all the regular episodes and also bonus episodes of Vulgar Piece Theater, where we're talking about costume dramas. We talked about Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. The next one coming up later this month, we're talking about Brotherhood of the Wolf, which is like a martial arts movie set during Revolutionary France. Then there's also episodes on the Patreon, like So This Asshole, where I talk about shitty men from history. And yes, it's there. You can get... I had said when I get 500 members of the Patreon, I will do So This Asshole, a special episode about John Knox, and I have, and it's there. So if you want to listen to that, you can join the Patreon for $5 a month. Or if you just want to listen to that without becoming a paid Patreon member, you can just buy So This Asshole, John Knox, or Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Vulgar Piece Theater, just for $5 Canadian at patreon.com. And we're also proud to be sponsored/brand partners with Common Era Jewelry. This is a jewelry company that is a small business, woman-owned. Tori, who runs the company, is such a fabulous person to be in this partnership with. But basically, the whole point of this jewelry line is to take women and, well, real-life women from history, but also mythological figures like Medusa, and make them into these beautiful jewelry, pendants and rings. She uses, for her gold pieces, she uses recycled gold, and there's also gold vermeil versions of most of the pieces, which is a more affordable option. Anyway, it's such a lovely business. The pieces are made in New York City. Everyone involved has healthcare and good wages. The packaging is made by a family-owned business in Chicago. When you get your order, it's in this beautiful box, this beautiful ribbon and everything. And there's people on pieces of these jewelry that we've talked about on the podcast, like Cleopatra, Agrippina, Boudica, and Anne Boleyn, for instance. She also sells beautiful bows, like scrunchies, things like that. Actually, I'm not sure if there's scrunchies, but there's definitely fabric bows. And Vulgar History listeners always get 15% off all items from Common Era by going to commonera.com/vulgar or using code VULGAR at checkout. And if you want to get your Vulgar History merch is available at vulgarhistory.com/store. Or if you're outside the US, the shipping is a bit better if you go to our alternate store, vulgarhistory.redbubble.com. And also I'll mention that all the books that I talk about on the podcast are on our bookshop.org page, which the link to that is also in the show notes as well. If you want to buy a copy of Not Your China Doll or whatever, and with a little bit of that purchase going to support Vulgar History, just use my bookshop link in the show notes. You can get in touch with me using the form at vulgarhistory.com, or you can email me directly at vulgarhistorypod@gmail.com, or you can just message me on Instagram where I am at vulgarhistorypod. I've mostly retreated from all other social media at present, but I'm always on Instagram. And also, if you join the Patreon, if you're a paid Patreon member at the $5 or more level, there's a Discord where I'm constantly lurking and hanging out and chatting with people about Vulgar History coded stuff. Transcripts of recent episodes are available at vulgarhistory.com. Thank you to Evelyn Malik for providing these transcripts. And next week, I like doing these little teasers for you because I just want you to know what's coming up, but without telling you too much, but just to get everybody hype and excited, because I'm always excited about every episode. I wish I could post them all and you could just binge listen to them all, but we spread them out. Anyway, next week, I have a very special episode with a very special guest who I've wanted to have on the podcast for such a long time. She is a fellow redheaded history person who you might know from Instagram, from her reels on there. I'm really excited to have this person on next week. So just think about who you think that might be. It's a requested collab that people have suggested. It's somebody who I'm sometimes mistaken for. Anyway, I did take a picture of next week's episode of me and this person talking to prove that we're not the same person, that we are two different people. Anyway, so stay tuned next week for a super amazing episode, and go and buy and read Not Your China Doll, or just look up an Anna May Wong movie. Some of them are streaming in various services. Piccadilly is an incredible choice if you're going to watch one. Shanghai Express. These are kind of two of the, I don't know. If you have the time, The Thief of Baghdad, it's like 2.5 hours long. But if you just watch the Anna May Wong parts, it's shorter. She's so sensational. I think if you just like look up clips of her on like YouTube or TikTok or whatever, like when you see her in action, she just draws you in. Like her star power is incredible. Like Hollywood movies were invented for Anna May Wong to be in them, as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, until next time, keep your pants on and your tits out. Vulgar History is hosted, written, and researched by Anne Foster and edited by Christina Lumagi.
Talmor, Sheshin Murachi. Talmor is my home. My family have worked the land for generations. My gran says the island does not belong to us, but we belong to the island. And we must be ready, for a great evil is coming, and death follows with it.
Listen and subscribe to the latest season of Undertow, The Harrowing, a Storyglass production presented by Realm, available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, I'm Jennifer, a founder of the Go Kid Go network. At Go Kid Go, putting kids first is at the heart of every show that we produce. That's why we're so excited to introduce a brand new show to our network called The Search for the Silver Lining, a fantasy adventure series about a spirited young girl named Isla who time travels to the mythical land of Camelot. Look for The Search for the Silver Lining on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.